Well, hello and welcome to Tuesday Chats, and really delighted this morning to welcome the incoming president of the Methodist Church in Ireland, Reverend David Nixon. So, hello, David.
Good morning, Stephen. Good to be with you.
Yeah, great to have you with us, and thank you so much for taking the time out to share with us in all your preparation for the conference and the year ahead. So we'll come to all of that in a moment. I suppose maybe I always try to start maybe where people's background and where they come from and stuff. So I suppose maybe I should acknowledge that we're from the same home circuit, the Enniskillen circuit, but more the country border end of the circuit. And David, you're originally from Black Lion. So do you want to tell us about just maybe something of your early life to give us a little bit of background? So.
Thank you, Stephen. Yes, as you say, we're from the same circuit, from the Enniskillen circuit, and I grew up in or outside the small village of Black Lion. Grew up on a farm, again like yourself. Grew up on a farm with a farming family. A lovely, enjoyable childhood, really. I was in a family of 5. And obviously, not obviously, but our parents brought us to church every Sunday morning, small little church in Black Lion. And that's where our faith was nurtured. Sunday school every Sunday morning, then CE during the week in the wintertime. And then as we grew a little bit, we went off to summer camps with Child Evangelism Fellowship with Joe and Mabel Kennedy in Sligo. And all of that, obviously, God was part of our lives. And we grew up with the stories, biblical stories and so on. And then it was at one of those camps in Ballantrae in Donegal, actually, in the Methodist Hall there that was being used at the time, where I became a Christian. It was a very simple experience in terms of my reasoning. I just felt, well, God loves me. Jesus died for me on the cross. And he wants to forgive my sins, and he wants to be my friend and my savior. And I invited him to do that. I do remember at the time feeling just a great sense of peace. And yeah, this was the right thing to do. And I've never regretted it since. Obviously, I suppose my faith has continued to grow, but it has also remained I would hope, a very simple and straightforward friendship, relationship, loving, caring relationship with Jesus. Somebody who is by my side all the time, has been with me throughout my life, and I've ended up traveling quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I keep referring to Psalm 139, where it says, "Where can I go from your spirit?" Wherever I go on the earth.
Yeah.
We find Jesus is there. And we meet members of our family, our Christian family, wherever we are in the world as well, which is wonderful. Yeah, so that's I suppose that's basically the simple background.
Thank you, Dave. I really appreciate you sharing that. I mean, as much as I'm familiar with a lot of the settings when you mentioned the CEF camps and in Ballantrae as well, very early memory, and Sligo. But just the beauty of that simple decision to follow Christ at an early age, that's powerful. In terms of how you stepping out in young adulthood, where were you in that regard, and what were you involved with? So.
Yeah, as I moved into secondary school, and it was either in early secondary school or even in primary school. I think I was only 10 or 11 when I became a Christian. But then in secondary school, we went to school in Manorhamilton in County Leitrim. And again, that was a place where faith continued to be nurtured in terms of the Church of Ireland, and the Methodist ministers came in to the school once a week during the term times, and they alternated, swapped about the minister from Sligo and the local Church of Ireland rector in Manorhamilton. And that again was a period when the faith was nurtured. As we grew into teenage years, then became more involved in youth fellowship in Enniskillen, in youth club in Letterbreen, and also more youth fellowship activities with CEF actually in Sligo. So I suppose there's two elements to all of that. With the fellowship in Sligo, I got to know Rhoda. She was Rhoda Thorpe at that point. And we eventually got married. But the other side of life then was I went through secondary school, loved woodwork when I was in secondary school. And I had an interesting experience in that I first of all, I would love to have been an architect. And the second love that I had, thought, I do love woodwork and I'd love to be a woodwork teacher. So when I left school, or finished and did my leaving cert, I didn't actually have enough points at that point to do secondary teaching. And so I decided to start serving my time, as we call it, or started an apprenticeship as a joiner. And then after a year, my teacher said, just apply for the college again. And there were 40 places and I came in number 43, I think. So I was waiting and hoping some people would drop out, but it didn't happen.
Right.
But then my minister in Enniskillen, Derek Haskins, obviously you would have remembered him.
Yeah.
Because he was, I suppose, watching and just observing what was happening. And I did very well. While I didn't get into college at that point for teaching, I continued working as a joiner and I was entered in various competitions and did very well at it and really, really enjoyed it. But then I got to the point where I thought, I've done very well and I have the potential and the ability to be doing very fine woodwork and so on. But somehow I just couldn't find an opening. It was like everywhere, every direction I went, it was just, I was stuck in some ways. And Derek came to me, he said, David, I feel that God wants you in the ministry. And as I often say to people, it wasn't the comment that I wanted to hear. Because although I had, as I would call it, a quiet faith, and I was very, very shy, had very little confidence in myself. And while I attended all those activities as a young person, I certainly was not the person that would be doing anything at the front, and it was very uncomfortable doing so. And yet when Derek said that to me, and I could see that things weren't working out with the woodwork, and I thought, in fact, with the woodwork, just to go back a little step back to close that story somewhat, when I did very well through the competitions, my woodwork teacher said to me, he said, okay, you have qualified as a carpenter, you've done very, very well. He said, you just go and apply to the college now again and as a mature student. And he said, obviously you'll have no problem getting in. And I applied to the college or contacted them. And for the first time since they opened, they decided not to take mature students. So again, that door was closed. And that's when, Derek came in then and said this. So I thought, okay, there's something strange going on here.
Yeah.
And as he advised, I prayed about it and thought about it. And okay, let me see if this door would open. So I started studying my local preachers. As you know, that's the path when it comes to ministry. And ministry at that point was still a long way off in my mind. But I thought, let me start, gradually opening the doors. trying the doors, not even open, but trying. So I started my local preacher's course. And in fact, then with Andrew Doherty's advice, because he had been to Cliff himself, and he suggested, David, if you're serious about this, why don't you go to Cliff for a year and use that course as your local preacher's course? And then you'd have to preach your trial sermon and do your interviews here at home and so on. But it would be a way of just getting away from woodwork and into a completely, area of ministry and so on. So that's what I did. I went to Cliff College and came back and obviously finished my local preacher training. But also, that was in 1990, when I came back from Cliff, Rhoda and I got married. And I applied for the evangelist position on the Dungannon circuit. So as soon as we got married, we actually moved to Dungannon that September, started in September with Reverend John Brooks. And again, this was a way of me testing the waters and seeing, is this really what God wants? Could I actually do this? And we went there and I settled into that, and it was hugely challenging, as you would understand. But I felt more comfortable as time went on, and then during the second year, then I candidated for the ministry, and I felt comfortable about it. The people around me on the circuit, and John Brooks as well, they were feeling, yes, we feel that you do have the gifts. And this is where I suppose the church comes in to help us test our various callings. And they said, yes, go ahead and see how you get on, candidate, and see what happens. And I also wanted God's assurance. And I was reading the Bible, and just those verses from Timothy just kind of jumped out at me. Preach the word in season and out of season. And I just felt, okay, that's God speaking to me. So I did candidate, and I was accepted into Edge Hill and went there in 92 for 3 years, 92 to 95.
Fantastic. It's so encouraging to hear you, David, because I think one of our recent readings in recent Sundays has been Paul traveling through, what we know as Western Turkey, and before he got the call to come over to Macedonia, it was a series of closed doors. And I think we always need to hear that encouragement, that there are closed doors, but it's God prompting us forward and new things. Really encouraging. Sorry, I kind of stopped you at Edge Hill there, and funny, I've a little memory of being at Edge Hill around 1990. And I remember, I think you and Rhoda were coming back from somewhere, it could have been Romania or somewhere. But do you want to say anything about Edge Hill, and then you're sort of going out onto circuits?
But just before when you talk about closed doors, I did have the question. The question was there in my mind, Lord, why did you give me such a gift for woodwork, such a love for woodwork, and a clear gift for it and so on, and then you just suddenly take it away? Where's the logic? Where's the sense in that? And yet I suppose part of me thought, well, David, if God called you to the ministry when you just left school, you hadn't a clue, you had no understanding of the world. So in fact, it wasn't in any way wasted experience. But the full answer to that did come later. But 3 years in Edge Hill. I'm not really an academic, Stephen.
This encourages me too, because I'm not. Okay.
And I didn't find Edge Hill easy. I just found it a tough 3 years. Always feeling that, because other friends and colleagues that you would know who are extremely intelligent and very, very academic and reveled in it, you know, but I just found I was constantly just trying to keep my head above the water, really. But one of the things that happened, just circumstances come along, but we had the opportunity, a friend of ours, Sheila Donaghy, from the Sligo circuit, she was working with a hospice in Romania. And so we ended up going out there, as you rightly said, you must have met us when we came back, and we went out and worked there for one of the summers. And that was an amazing experience, just doing something completely and utterly different, you know. And the second summer that we had available then, we had the opportunity of going to Kenya and living and working with the Methodist people there and observing, not doing a lot of work, but really just observing the work that the Methodist Church were doing. We stayed in Mombasa and travelled up to Lusaka and up to their theological college in Meru and so on. But most of it was with the local churches in Mombasa. And that ignited a little bit of a spark or a flame within us. We said, you know, there's an interest there. And we thought, maybe we should think about this in the future, going overseas. But anyhow, we came back to Edgehill, I did my last year there, and then we were sent to Moville in Donegal on the Inishowen Peninsula and part of the Londonderry Mission Circuit. But during the 3 years then that we were in Moville, we just felt we used to go to the Strickland's Missionary Conference every year. And we just thought, we have to just let our names go forward. We can't get this, it's like this thing is gnawing away at us and we can't get it out of our minds. I remember us then just saying to the people concerned, Ken Todd at the time, and just offering our names and saying, okay, we feel this is something that, could you help us with this thought again and work out, is this God calling us or whatnot? And I remember again, once we had made that decision, we thought, well, it doesn't really matter now if we're accepted or not accepted. We feel that we have done what, you know, we need to do at this point. But anyhow, we were accepted. So we finished in Moville in 98, and then we went to Birmingham for 6 months training, 8 or 9 months training, and we went out to Zambia then at the end of April, beginning of May in 99. And that was the start of 13 years of working overseas. Right, brilliant. Working with the church there.
Yeah, and I mean, what you're going to come to in sharing about your story in Zambia, it just makes me wonder, what did you know before you went to Zambia? Was it just stepping out, right? Yeah, so even though I think, I'm guessing you're probably going to tie in your carpentry experience coming out there, but so that's interesting. Yeah, just stepping out. Anyway, just tell us about Zambia.
Yeah, because it was a big step of faith. We had never been to Zambia at all. And we went, Samuel was 1.5 and Christopher was less than 1 when we arrived in Zambia. He was just a baby. So yeah, you know, it was a huge shock to the system, arriving there with 2 little children. And I remember it was one of those points, a very, very low point in my life, you know, when we ended up in our own little house. And it maybe didn't help when the bishop who was in charge of us at the time said, you know, if you need a security man, just let me know, and I'd organise a security man to be with you. Wow. And I remember thinking, what have I brought Rhoda and the boys into? You know, and I really reached a low point. I remember managing to send a message home to my sister Hazel and just saying, pray for us. But yeah, and we just got our hands into the work and got stuck into it. Struggle. The first year was a real struggle, I think, for all of us. And we did say at one point, we had a visit from our, I suppose you'd call them our supervisors or those who were looking after us in London. Some of them came and we said, look, when our 2 years, 6 months is up, or 2 years, 9 months, we want to go somewhere else. We'll not stick it out here. And yet, whenever that person went back to London, both of us said, you know something, we've made a mistake. It's like things just started to get going and started to change and improve. You know? And they really did improve. And I did find the remarkable thing was that I did find the answer to that question, Lord, why did you give me this gift for carpentry? When we arrived, we discovered that the church there had received a gift of money from a church in Dortmund in Germany. And that money was given to them. They had already developed a little partnership together. And the money was given to set up a skills training center. And so they wanted to set up a carpentry workshop and tailoring for the girls and so on. But they really didn't know what to do or how to go about it.
Yes.
So having been through a skills training center myself, that's where my gifts came in. And so we ended up then, we stayed for the 3 years, then we went back and stayed for another 10 years. And that 10-year period was spent with me developing that skills training center from scratch, from a greenfield site. And becoming principal without ever becoming a woodwork teacher. So, you know, God did, I could see, well, that was what the training was for. And it's just amazing, really, how God's plans can come around, you know. And we could have been sent anywhere in the world. But God knew, no, actually, I can use David's gifts in that particular situation, you know. But it was great. For the first 3 years, we were working with the circle. It was called a consistory. 13 churches, and I had a deaconess and a lay evangelist working with me in those churches. And it was just, you were constantly moving, running, going from one church to the next. You couldn't get around them all. Obviously, on a Sunday, you could only do one service. So inevitably, then you'd go out on, you know, the main churches were in the town, but then you'd try to go to the rural churches as well. And then you'd end up, when you'd go, you'd have Holy Communion, you'd have a council meeting, and you might have a baptism or two. So everything had to be done, and you'd have lunch, and you'd go out in the morning, you mightn't be back till 4 or 5 o'clock in the evening, completely and utterly exhausted. But it was amazing, you know, every day I have no doubt, you'd go off in the morning and you think, I want to do this, that, and the other, and you'd go off in the pickup and maybe meet somebody from the church along the road, and then they'd say, oh, this has happened or that has happened, we need to do this. And your plans for the day would just be out the window. So it was always so interesting. So, and challenging, obviously. Just the struggles that people went through was, you know, life was tough. Life was tough for them. But then the vibrancy in the churches, you know, and if a church wasn't growing, the question was, what's going wrong here? What's happening? Why is this church not growing? Because most of them were gradually growing, and often having to rebuild their churches, the building becoming too small and having to rebuild and make it into bigger churches. And then, of course, the service is just so lively and vibrant, and the choirs. It was great for me as a preacher as well, because I found the lay leadership extremely strong and powerful. And I would go into the vestry in St. Andrew's, the biggest church, and they would be having an elders meeting when I'd arrive. and I'd sit and try to listen to them, but they spoke Bamba or Nyanja or Tonga, so it was difficult. They didn't always use the one language.
Wow. Right.
And then we get near the time of the service and say, oh, Baruti, which is the word for minister, what is your reading? And I'd give them my reading for the day. And then they would just say, the secretary of the congregation secretary would say, okay, so-and-so, will you do the prayer of intercession? Will you do the offering prayer? Madam Mrs. Peary, will you do the order of service? Ms. Mansa, will you do the closing prayer or whatever? And all I had to do was preach. So they led the worship, led the service, and did all of the things and so on. And I preached then using an interpreter.
Yeah.
But it was I just loved the way in which they were so free themselves, and so yes, I'll do that, I'll do that. Yeah, and just no preparation, there's your reading. And away they go with it, you know.
Fantastic. Brilliant. And I mean, it's powerful to hear that vibrancy and to know, you know, I mean, the Methodist Church is praying for you and Rhoda during that time, and the boys, and I suppose even the, you know, family and connection in Florence Court, you know, seeking to be of support. Yeah. But to hear you just say that about the start, reaching that point of sort of thinking that you'd need to move. I mean, it's crazy how God often, we have to reach that point before God opens up such blessing, and or you know, that we see the blessing of God ahead. So yeah.
And again, just I think also the support from home, and you've just pointed to that. You know, knowing that so many people were praying for us, and then as I started working on the Skills Training Centre, receiving so much practical support from the container ministry. And you know, finances as well. We helped. I can't even remember how many motorcycles we bought for rural ministers and lay evangelists. You know, donations of money that we would have received, and it was a great way of enabling or helping them with their work. And even when I was there for the 3 years on the circuit, because after that 3-year period, the bishop said, I want you just to look after the Skills Training Centre. But I did feel, before he said that, I did feel when I was in the churches that part of my role was simply maybe to lift it a little bit.
Okay.
In terms of its organization and making it more efficient and sorting out some financial issues and so on. And I felt that my role was then to hand it back, you know, for a local Zambian minister to come in, because they have all the skills, they have all they know the cultural
totally
on, you know. So it was nice then to be able to help them. Even over the following years, ministers in rural circuits, and transport was always a problem for them. And it was nice to be able to support them and just help them in their ministry, you know.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, the church at home, the support of it at home was just fantastic during that period. Really, really was.
And that's important to hear, you know, for ongoing support for whoever and in whatever situation. And
you find too, you know, sorry to cut across you, Stephen, but you'd often find cards would arrive. And like, you could not predict when you post something in Ireland when it would get to me in Zambia. Some didn't get. But, you know, it could be 2 weeks, it could be 2 months, it could be 6 months. And yet so often we found that whenever a card or a letter came in, it was just, oh my goodness, how did this land today? It was, you know, exactly when you needed to hear something or be assured of something or to just get a message. I'd say sometimes you'd be blown away with God's timing. How is this possible?
Brilliant.
You know, it happens.
And you touched on just that handing over when it came to leaving. Was it a recognition, well, hey, this is in God's hands and we have served our purpose here. What was it? Well, I'm sure it was difficult to leave all the same. But,
it was, for most of the years that I was there, I said I could stay here the rest of my life.
Yeah.
I just did. We did find it so rewarding and fulfilling, and just lovely colleagues and friends and so on working with us. And I did say, I could stay here forever. But I also said, when the time is right, we'll know, and God will leave it, make it easy to move and so on. And really what prompted us to come home, the initial prompting was, we had sent the boys back to Wesley College here for their secondary education. Rhoda homeschooled them for the primary school level education in Zambia. Although she wasn't a teacher, she was amazingly adaptable. And she got material from what is called Worldwide Education Service, I think it was called at the time. And they created material specifically for children who wanted to follow a British curriculum, as it was, but who were all over the world. So you were connected to a tutor in England, and Rhoda sent work back. But when it came to the secondary level, it was becoming more and more difficult, and it just wasn't a good idea, we felt. So we sent them back to Wesley, although again that was one of those things that I really struggled
I'm sure
with that. And I always felt in myself that it was wrong of any missionary to ever send their children away from their parents. And yet again, we found doors opened that shouldn't have opened. Christopher was, they said, when we talked to them about it, they said, there's no way we're going to be separated. We have to go together. And like, they were separated by a year academically. And yet, when we consulted with Wesley College, they agreed that Christopher could go into prep and Samuel go into first year. But they never, up until that point, they didn't take boarders. They didn't take prep boarders.
Okay.
So they relented on that. And then there were other issues with fees and so on. And yet the doors that were closed and should have been closed were suddenly opened.
Powerful.
And so eventually we said, God is opening, God is making this possible. And they did come home. But it was difficult over the next couple of years in terms of, the way I describe it, is that there was a gap of 9,000 miles, I think it was. Miles or kilometers, but a long distance, 9,000 is there somewhere. But also a gap started to develop between us, because we were close as a family, having been living together in the circumstances we were in Zambia, so we were close as a family, but it was difficult to maintain that closeness. And eventually we said, look, Rhoda and I said, we're not going to keep this going. Always looking forward to the next holiday period when we could be with the boys, or they could be with us. And that really brought the decision about. And that combined with, I got to the point with the project where I said, now I feel it's the right time to hand it over. And to let somebody else. I had brought it as far as I could, and I thought it would be good for somebody else to come in here and take the lead. And we did. That's what happened then. We came back in 2012.
Fantastic.
Brilliant.
And so you return now to Dublin North. And do you want to, in theory, this is meant to be a half-hour chat, and we're well over half an hour at this stage. But, it was great, fantastic, just hearing. So do you want to tell us about that returning, and then you went to Dunleary, and then if I can ask about Rhoda's illness coming into this as well, Dave, if you're happy.
Thank you. We came to Dublin North first, and we spent 5 years there. And during that 5-year period, then Rhoda got a job in the Home Mission Department. So she was cycling back and forward from Terranure to Raheny. through the city every day and so on, and she enjoyed that. And it was lovely being obviously close to the boys again. They did continue boarding, but we were able to see them every weekend, take them out every weekend. You know? And the people in Sutton, Clontarf and Skerries, they were great at helping us to readjust, because it was a big adjustment coming back. You know? And then we moved to Dunleary here, where I am at the moment, in 2018. And Rhoda felt it was right at that time to give up her job in Home Mission Department. So we moved in July, and she finished work then the end of July, beginning of August, and went off on holiday. We went to not Switzerland, but what's the country besides Switzerland? Germany, Austria. We went to Austria for a week's holiday, or 2 weeks holiday. It was a week or two. But when we were there, Rhoda had been complaining of a little bit of neck pain. She was taking paracetamol and so on, struggling to get on top of it. But we took bicycles from the hotel in Austria, and of course Austria, as you know, was hilly. But Rhoda was a cyclist and she was very fit. But she couldn't get, she was out of breath and just couldn't get enough oxygen into her lungs. And we didn't really think too much about it, but said, no, we need to get something sorted with her neck. But we came back then August and got into the work here in September. But she had been consulting somebody, and this man said, I think you need to go to your doctor and try and get a chest x-ray, because she started having a cough at that point. So she cycled to the doctor here in Dean's Grange, and the doctor said, okay, go ahead for your x-ray, and cycled down to the hospital for the x-ray. And they discovered that she had the lung cancer. And it was already at that stage, which was such a shock to us, it was already at stage 4. So then, you know, that just took over completely. Hospital appointments, chemotherapy, radiotherapy, because the cancer spread to her brain. But thankfully, the radiotherapy stopped it and arrested it in her brain. But yeah, and it just, there was I suppose you could say, a slow deterioration then over the next 2 years until she died just 2 years later, 19th of September, 2020. Yeah. So that has been
thank you, David. I mean, and please feel free to share or not what, you know, in regard to Rhoda's loss and the impact on you, and how you even see loss.
In some ways, I suppose always loss is different for everybody, because every piece of grieving is different, because we have different relationships with different people. And the grief that you have for your mother or father when they pass away won't be the same as the grief that you have for a spouse or a brother or sister or a child or whatever. So I suppose, it's good to recognize that it's all unique. I suppose for us, and I'll be talking about this at conference, the big thing for me, for us, was just, you know, God was in it all. And even the fact that we were moved from Dublin North to Dunleary, that meant that we were just right beside the hospice here in Blackrock and all the facilities that they offered, the support that they offered. We were beside St. Vincent's Hospital, where she received all her chemotherapy and so on, not far from St. James's, where she got some of her radiotherapy. And we had a congregation who, many of whom nursed and knew people who suffered from cancer, some of whom had cancer, have cancer themselves. And they just wrapped their arms, as I described, wrapped their arms of love and support around us, and became our parents and our brothers and our sisters, and became our family. Bringing food here every week. They were so kind. So in all of that, you can see God in it all. Although obviously that doesn't take away the grief and the pain and the sorrow and so on. But, the other group, and from the congregation you're with there, the other group that that Rhoda connected with were Lisa's lassies, who, again, it's often difficult as a spouse of a minister when you're being moved from place to place to keep and maintain friendships. But Lisa's lassies became another little family support group for Rhoda. And they were just so invaluable to Rhoda during that period, and gave her so much encouragement and support. And through their WhatsApp group and so on, they were constantly in touch with her. So God was in it all. Right up to the very end, because Rhoda passed away in Fermanagh with a house there, and she just loved it. And there, she didn't have to go into hospital in the end. The local doctor, Dr. Tracy, was just, as Rhoda described him, he was an angel from surgery there, and he assured her, he said, look, we will look after you. And they did, with the local hospice care there as well, and the palliative care nurses, they were brilliant.
Fantastic.
So that, I suppose, it doesn't take away the pain, but you just can turn, God, you know it all. You've shown us that you know it all. You understand.
Totally. Yeah, and thank you for sharing that, David. And just if anyone's watching outside of this circuit, Lisa's lassies connected with a number of women in different places, very much including on the North Tipperary circuit. So, and just it's powerful to hear you just share, and thank you for being open and sharing. Can I maybe, just as we sort of we look forward to you being president of the church for this year ahead, and I mean you're carrying all your experience and including everything we've talked about here into this role. But do you have particular hopes or a theme as president, and maybe also just how in the role that it contains, do you have anything to say about our world or Ireland, North and South today, or even the Methodist Church in Ireland today? I should have divided that up into a number of questions, but I've thrown everything out there. So you're president, you have to deal with everything now, or nearly. So
yeah, again, it's interesting. It's hard to understand some of these things because I was first nominated in 2018, and then Rhoda got sick, obviously. And I eventually stepped down. Rhoda really struggled with that because she wanted to support me, and she was, excited about the prospect and so on. And she really was disappointed and feeling that it was almost her fault. And I, had to keep saying, it's not your fault. We have cancer in our home, and that's our first responsibility and so on. But the reason I say all that is that when it comes to theme, during that 6-month period, you're trying to think, what is my theme going to be? What is my theme going to be? I couldn't come up with a theme. I couldn't think. Up until the very end, I said, I can't. I have no idea of what a theme is. And this time, when I was nominated last year, I just thought, okay, with all that I've come through, my theme is going to be God's lavish love. And it's coming purely from my experience and from my observation and from the power of God's love coming to us. But coming to us, the key to it for me is, it's easy to talk about an abstract term of God's lavish love, but that love came to us through Christian people and people that God was using. God didn't appear at the door here with a meal. Somebody else did. God didn't make the phone call or send the note or send the WhatsApp message to Rhoda or, say to me when I was stuck and struggling with taking a service, it was a local preacher who said, let me look after it.
Mhm.
But God worked, and his love came to us through all of those people.
Mm.
So, so that's my theme for the year. And I think we have, as a church and as a people, as Christians, sometimes maybe I wonder, do we make things too complicated when all God asks us to do is really share my love with other people?
Mm. Yeah.
In the things you say to them, and in sharing my good news with them, and also in just the simple, well, it's simple for some people to cook a meal. It's not simple for other people.
Yeah.
But, in practical ways as well, and saying, if you need a lift, just give me a call, or when I'll be there at 8 o'clock and we'll be at the hospital at 9:30, and, or, reaching out in practical ways like that. I just got somebody was at one of our, at our little toddlers group this week. And she sent a text back to the person who's running it. This parent or the carer that was looking after the children sent this back. She said, thanks so much for this morning. My first time going and really enjoyed. And then she says, the nicest atmosphere at any playgroup I have been to.
Super.
No, and that's because Diane and Shirley, two people in our congregation, that play group had to stop before COVID, even before COVID came along, because Diane didn't have the time to give to it. And she still kept it in her heart and said, I have to get that going again at some point, to serve the community and to reach out as a means of reaching people who don't come into our church on Sunday morning. And she never gave up. And when COVID disappeared and she had more time, she came back to it again. And then Shirley, who has retired from her job, she was available. And there it is now. And to me, that's God's lavish love, reaching out to that person who is looking after one or two children and saying, we care.
Yeah.
You are important to us.
Yeah.
And I suppose the other thing that I'd love to be able to do is, during my year, just encourage people, encourage ministers, encourage lay workers, encourage people who are working full-time, people who are working part-time in the church, encourage the members, to keep going, because sometimes we can feel that, and we use this term, I'm only able to do this,
right,
or I'm only doing that. And I just think that's exactly what God wants you to do.
Yeah.
Forget the only, and let God just work through you. And shine and bloom where you're planted.
Yeah.
Let God's light shine through you, wherever you are.
Totally.
I'm not sure if I've answered any of your questions.
Oh no, that's fantastic, David. I'm not looking at any specific. It's just wonderful to chat, and we really appreciate your time sharing with us, and it is an encouragement, and it really is an encouragement in faith, just to hear everything that you've shared. And we do wish you well, and this is a prompt for us to keep praying for you during this year. And
we need everybody's prayers and appreciate them.
Yeah. So, well, I hope we've covered everything that maybe you want to share. Anyway, just so listen, thank you very much for sharing with us in this conversation, and we continue to wish you well for your installation as president and the year ahead. So thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you. And the Lord bless you as well as you continue on your journey of discovery as to what God wants you to do.
Thank you very much. Thank you.